A rifle shot tore the night open, and the girl's hand came away wet, with something warm, that was not rain. The horse reared. Black pines swallowed her scream whole. Behind them, beneath the lightning-split cottonwood, a barrel still smoked, held by a man, who had been waiting there all night. Not a soldier. No uniform. But he knew exactly which night they would ride. Someone had talked. Hooves hammering stone. Blood beating down the saddle leather. The ravine opened ahead like a mouth, with no bottom, and in that half-second she understood the man beside her had fallen back half a length. Then a full length. Then nothing at all. She wheeled the horse, so hard it nearly went down beneath her. Scree slid under her boots. She screamed his name, into the dark below, once, twice. And the dark gave her nothing back. The mountains of the New Mexico territory did not care whose daughter you were. Odessa Hale learned that early. Learned it the way you learn a scar. Slow. Then all at once. Fort Bracken sat low in the valley like a wound, that never quite closed, its walls the color of old bone, its gates groaning open every morning at the same hour, closing every night at the same hour, the whole place running on a clock, that belonged to her father, and no one else. Colonel Everett Hale did not believe in wasted motion. He did not believe in wasted words either. He believed in order. In lines. In the particular silence that falls over a room when a man in uniform walks into it. Odessa was 18 years old, and she had spent every one of those years learning how to disappear inside that silence. She was good at it now. Good at the small lie. Good at the soft cough, that meant a headache, the headache that meant an afternoon alone, the afternoon alone, that meant a horse saddled behind the officer's stables, while the wives of Fort Bracken sipped bitter coffee, and traded gossip like currency. Agatha covered for her. Agatha always covered for her, had covered for her, since Odessa was small enough to hide behind the woman's skirts during her mother's funeral, and there was a debt in that, Odessa knew, a debt she paid back in nothing, but trust and the occasional terrified glance toward the door. Just a few hours. That was the promise she made to the horse. To herself. To the pine trees, that opened up ahead of her like a curtain drawing back on a stage only she was allowed to see. Because that was the thing about Colonel Hale's daughter. She had learned to become two women. One who sat straight-backed at Sunday services, with her hair pinned, so tight it made her scalp ache. And one who rode alone, into the Cazadero foothills, with her hair loose, and her boots muddy, and her heart doing something it was never supposed to do inside the walls of Fort Bracken. Beating like it belonged to her. The trail narrowed. Climbed. The pines thickened, until the light came down in coins instead of sheets, and somewhere beneath the hush of hooves on packed earth she could already hear it. The water. Larkspur Creek, falling from a shelf of granite 30 feet up, crashing into a pool, so clear you could count the stones on the bottom, if you had the patience for counting, which Odessa never did. She had the patience for other things. For waiting. For watching the tree lean. For pretending, when her father asked, that she had spent her afternoon doing needlework she had never once picked up. She tied the horse. Slipped behind the falling curtain of water, into the small stone hollow she had found 2 summers ago, and told no one about. Not Agatha. Not the diary she kept, and then burned, page by page, out of fear someone would read it. This was hers. The one place outside Fort Bracken, where nobody watched her. Nobody measured her. Nobody said, Odessa, sit up straight, Odessa, a colonel's daughter does not laugh, that loudly, Odessa, when are you going to grow, into the woman this family needs you to be? She peeled off the riding dress. Folded it with more care than she gave anything at the fort. Waded into water, so cold it stole the breath clean out of her chest, and she went under anyway, because the cold was the point, the cold was what washed the fort off her skin, and when she came up gasping, laughing, hair streaming. She felt it. The particular weight of being watched. Her laughter died in her throat. She turned. And there he was. Standing at the edge of the pool like he had grown up out of the rock itself. Tall. Bare-chested but for a leather cord, and a small beaded pouch resting against his sternum. Skin the color of the canyon at dusk. A single eagle feather woven into black hair that fell past his shoulders. A knife at his hip, worn, used, not for show. And eyes, dark, unreadable, fixed on her, with a stillness that should have terrified her. Odessa's mind ran through every warning her father had ever given her. Every story. Every lecture about savages, and danger and the particular fate that awaited a foolish girl caught alone in these mountains. She should scream. She should run. Except she didn't move at all. "This is sacred water," the man said. English. Careful, deliberate, each word placed like a stone across a river. "You bathe in the spirit of my ancestors." Her voice cracked. She hated that it cracked. "I didn't know. I'll go." She started for the shore. He lifted one hand. Not a threat. Barely even a gesture. And still she stopped, because something in it demanded stillness, and her body obeyed, before her mind caught up. "You are not afraid," he said. "Not a question." "Should I be?" The words left her, before she could stop them. Bold. Too bold. Her father's daughter, apparently, whether she wanted to be or not. The corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile. Something adjacent to one. "Most white women scream," he said. "At the sight of Apache. I'm not most white women." "No." A beat. His gaze did not drop from her face, not once, though water ran in rivers down her bare shoulders, and she was standing in a mountain pool in nothing but her underthings, and every instinct told her to care about that, and somehow, impossibly, she found that she didn't. "You are not." He took a step back. "I go." "You finish." "Wait." She didn't know why she said it. Didn't understand the impulse even, as it left her mouth, some reckless thing rising up, from a part of her she had spent 18 years keeping locked behind good posture, and proper manners. "What's your name?" He studied her the way a man studies weather. Trying to decide, if it will pass, or if it will drown you. "I am called Delshay. I'm Odessa. Odessa Hale." Something shifted behind his eyes. Small. A door closing somewhere far back in a hallway she couldn't see. "Hale," he repeated. "Daughter of the colonel who hunts my people. I'm not my father." The words came out fast. Fierce. Surprising even her. "I don't believe what he says about your people. I never have." Delshay's jaw tightened. "Your father's men killed my brother 8 moons past. Called it a battle." His voice dropped, quiet and terrible. It was not a battle. Odessa felt the ground tilt beneath her. What was it? He didn't answer. Just looked at her for a long moment, weighing something, and then reached into the small pouch at his belt, and withdrew a stone. Turquoise. Polished smooth by years of a hand she would never know, until now, until this one. He extended his closed fist. She waited closer. Hesitated. Then opened her palm beneath his. The stone dropped into her hand, warm from his skin. "Protection," he said. "From the water spirits." Their fingers brushed. Just barely. And something moved, through her, quick and electric, gone before she could name it. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded once. Turned to leave. "Will I see you again?" The question was out, before she could weigh the wisdom of it. Delshay paused. Looked back over one bare shoulder. "Perhaps," he said. If the spirits wish it. And then the forest simply absorbed him. No sound of footsteps. No rustle of brush. One moment he was there, and the next the pines stood empty, and Odessa stood alone in the cold water, with a stone clutched in her fist, and her heart going like a drum, that had forgotten how to keep time. She should tell her father. An Apache scout so close to Fort Bracken. That was intelligence. That was the kind of thing that mattered to a man like Colonel Everett Hale, who measured the value of a day by what threats it contained, and what threats it eliminated. She knew this. And she also knew, dressing with trembling hands, mounting her horse for the ride home, that she would say nothing. Not one word. Because the stone in her pocket felt like a secret worth keeping. And because something in his voice, when he said your father's men killed my brother, had cracked something open in her, that she was not yet ready to close. Dinner at the Hale table, that evening was the same as every evening. Her father at the head, uniform still buttoned to the throat, though the day's duties had ended hours before, because Colonel Hale did not believe a man should be comfortable simply because the sun had gone down. Odessa across from him. Agatha moving quiet, as a ghost between them, refilling water glasses no one had asked her to refill. You were out riding again. Not a question. Everett Hale did not often ask questions. He made statements, and waited to see if you had the nerve to contradict them. Yes, father. Alone. Yes. He set down his fork. The sound of it against the plate was small, and precise, and somehow louder than a gunshot. Odessa. I know the trails, father. I've ridden them 100 times. You've ridden them, without my knowledge 100 times, he said. That is not the same as knowing them. She said nothing. It was easier, most nights, to say nothing. There have been reports, he continued, of Apache movement in the foothills. Scouts. A raiding party, possibly, gathering strength before the season turns. His eyes found hers across the table, and for one terrible second she was certain he could see straight, through her skin to the stone hidden beneath her collar. It is not safe out there. Not for a woman alone. Not for my daughter. I understand. Do you? Because that was the thing about her father. He never simply accepted an answer. He turned it over first, looking for the lie underneath, and Odessa had gotten very good, over 18 years, at making sure there was nothing to find. I understand, father, she said again, softer this time, and he studied her a moment longer, before returning to his meal, and the subject, for tonight, was closed. Later, lying awake in the narrow bed of her narrow room in the narrow life her father had built for her, Odessa took the stone, from beneath her collar, and held it up to the moonlight coming, through the window. Your father's men killed my brother. It was not a battle. She turned the words, over the way Delshay had turned, over the stone, before giving it to her. Trying to find the shape of the truth hidden inside them. Until sleep took her, finally, sometime past midnight, the stone still warm in her closed fist. She went back the next day. Told herself it was for the solitude. Told herself, riding out past the fort gates, with her heart already racing ahead of the horse, that she simply wanted the quiet of the water, the shade of the pines, nothing more. She did not believe herself. Not for 1 mile of that ride. She was halfway to the falls, when she heard it. A twig, snapping somewhere behind her, too deliberate to be an animal, and she turned in the saddle expecting, hoping, and there he was. Walking alongside her horse, with a silence, that made the animal itself seem loud by comparison. You return, Delshay said. So do you. These mountains are patient land, he said, matching her pace without effort. Your father claims them with paper. The earth remembers its true owners. Odessa dismounted. In daylight she could see what the shadows of the pool had hidden the day before. A scar tracing, from his temple to the edge of his jaw. the intricate beadwork on the pouch at his hip. And beneath the stillness of his face, something sharper. Watchfulness. The look of a man who had learned, the hard way, that the world did not forgive carelessness. "Why aren't you with your people?" she asked. "I scout. Watch soldier movements." A pause, and something flickered at the corner of his mouth. "Watch Colonel's daughter ride alone. Where she should not." Heat rose in her cheeks. "Are you going to take me prisoner?" "What would I do," he said, "with a colonel's daughter? Your father would bring the army into these mountains. Many would die. Then why speak to me at all?" He considered the question longer than she expected. "You are different," he said finally. "You see the world with open eyes. Rare, among your people." They walked. He showed her which berries would poison her, and which would save her, which bark could break a fever, which leaves closed a wound. She listened the way she had never listened to anything at Fort Bracken, hungry for it, because here was a kind of knowledge nobody had ever thought to offer a colonel's daughter. And she told him things too. About the books she read in secret, hidden beneath loose floorboards, stories of women who sailed oceans, and crossed deserts, and refused every cage built for them. He listened without interrupting. Without the small judgments she had come to expect, from every man who had ever heard her speak too plainly. "Tomorrow?" he asked, when the light began to slant gold through the trees, and she knew she had to go. The question hung there, loaded with something neither of them said aloud. "Tomorrow," she said. On the third day, there was a fire waiting when she arrived. Small. Careful. Tucked into a hollow of rock, so the smoke wouldn't carry, and beside it a rabbit, already skinned, already prepared. "I will teach you to cook the Apache way," Delshay said, and it was not a question either, and Odessa found she did not mind. She spent the afternoon learning how to read a track in soft earth, how to move through brush without snapping a single branch, how to sit still, truly still, long enough for the forest to forget you were there at all, and go on with its business around you. And as the fire burned low, and the shadows lengthened, she told him about her mother. Dead 6 years now. About the ranch her uncle owned 3 days' ride from the fort, the one he'd promised her once, half joking, that she'd run better than he did. About the marriage her father was already quietly engineering for her, some captain, some lieutenant, it hardly mattered which, because the shape of the cage would be the same no matter whose name was on it. Delshay listened. Fed the fire. Said nothing until she'd finished, and then he spoke of his own life, his training, the ceremonies of his people, the slow encroachment of settlers eating away at land that had never once belonged to anyone, with a deed. "My father says your people raid settlements," Odessa said carefully. "Kill innocent people. Some do." He didn't flinch from it. "As some soldiers kill innocent Apache. War makes monsters of men on both sides. He says the fighting near the Larkspur breaks, the one that killed your brother." She hesitated. "He calls it an uprising. Says your people attacked first." Something went very still in Delshay's face. "That is the paper truth," he said. "Not the true truth." "What happened?" He was quiet for a long moment. The fire popped. Somewhere above them an owl called once, and fell silent. "My brother went to speak with the agent," Delshay said finally. "Pratt. About food promised, never given. Land promised, then sold from beneath us." His jaw worked. He went with empty hands. No weapon. Came back, he stopped. Started again, quieter. He did not come back. Odessa felt something cold settle in her stomach. "And the soldiers said?" "Soldiers said Apache attacked first. Said my brother's band violated treaty. Hunted forbidden land." His eyes found hers across the fire, dark and unflinching. We were starving, Odessa Hale. The agent stole what was promised us. And when my people went hungry to the hills to hunt, your father's men called it war. Odessa sat with that. Turned it over the way she had turned, over the stone, searching for a shape she could live inside. Because it did not fit. Something about it did not fit, and she couldn't, yet say why, only that a thread had come loose somewhere in the story she'd been told her whole life, and once a thread comes loose you cannot stop pulling at it. Not once you've noticed it's there. That night, when she should have ridden home, she didn't. She told herself it was the fire. The warmth of it. The way the mountains at night felt safer, somehow, in the small circle of its light. She told herself many things, sitting there across, from a man, who watched her like she was worth watching, and none of them were the whole truth, and she knew it. I should go, she said, and did not move. Night is dangerous, Delshay said. Stay until morning. And she did. What passed between them, that night was not spoken of in words she would ever repeat to another soul. A closeness built slow, out of 3 days of small trust laid brick by brick, his hand steadying hers, over a knife, her laughter at something he said, that surprised them both, the particular silence of two people, who have run out of reasons to keep their distance. Under a sky more full of stars than she had ever let herself notice at the fort, in the sound of water falling somewhere close, Odessa Hale chose something for herself for the first time in her life. Chose it and did not regret it. Not then. Not after. This cannot be undone, Delshay murmured. Much later, the fire burned down to embers. I don't want it undone, she said. Near dawn, wrapped in his blanket, with the turquoise stone warm between them, Delshay traced a slow line along her shoulder. My people believe, he said, that when souls meant to find each other finally do, the stars burn brighter that night. Odessa looked up. The sky was beginning to pale at its eastern edge, but the stars still hanging there did seem, impossibly, brighter than she remembered them ever being. They do, she whispered. He was quiet a long moment. And then, in a voice, that had gone careful, deliberate, the voice of a man setting down something heavy he had carried a long way. There is more I did not tell you. About my brother. Odessa went still. Tell me now. The night before he died, Delshay said, he came to me. Said he had proof. A paper. Pratt's name on land sales, our land, sold to a company back east, before the fighting ever began. Sold before there was any uprising to blame it on. His eyes found hers, dark and steady in the graying light. My brother meant to bring that paper to your father. To show him the truth, before more men died for a lie. Odessa's breath caught. Did he reach him? I do not know, Delshay said. He never came back to tell me. The word settled into her chest like a stone dropped into still water, sending rings out in every direction, and Odessa understood, with a clarity that frightened her, that the story she had grown up inside, the story where her father's uniform meant safety, and her father's word meant truth, had a crack running straight through its foundation. And she was the only one, perhaps, standing close enough to see it. She left before the fort woke, riding hard through mist that clung low to the valley floor, and slipped back into her room, through the same window she'd climbed out of 3 mornings running, and told herself no one had noticed. She was wrong. 2 days later, delivering a stack of correspondence to her father's study at his request, Colonel Hale disliked handling his own papers, disliked it the way he disliked any task beneath his rank. Odessa found him absent, called away by some commotion at the stables, and the desk left open. She should have simply set the letters down and gone. She did not. Because there, beneath a half-finished report on Apache movements in the northern quadrant, lay a ledger she had never seen before. Land transactions. Company names she didn't recognize. And there, near the bottom of a page dated 8 months prior, 8 months, the same 8 months Delshay had spoken of at the fire, a signature. Cyrus Pratt. Beside it, a sail. Acreage along the Larkspur watershed. Sold to a mining concern out of Santa Fe for a sum that made her stomach turn, dated 3 weeks before the uprising that had cost Delshay his brother. 3 weeks before. Odessa stood frozen over the desk, the ledger trembling faintly in her hands, and somewhere in the hallway she heard her father's boots returning, and she had perhaps 10 seconds to decide what kind of woman she was going to be. She closed the ledger. Set it exactly where it had lain. Arranged the letters beside it, with hands that did not shake nearly as much as she expected them to. And when her father entered, she was already at the door, offering him nothing but a small, practiced smile. "The post, father." He grunted something that might have been thanks. Did not look up from whatever had called him away. Did not see, because men like Everett Hale rarely saw, the particular stillness of a daughter who has just learned something that will not let her sleep. She rode for the falls that same afternoon, reckless with it, pushing her horse harder than she should have on the narrow trail, because the words were burning a hole straight through her and she needed to say them to someone who would understand their weight. Delshay was waiting. He read her face before she'd even dismounted. "What is wrong?" "I found it," she said, breathless, the words tumbling out faster than she could order them. "The ledger. Pratt's name. A sale, Delshay, the land along the creek, sold to a mining company 3 weeks before the fighting. 3 weeks before your brother died." Delshay's whole body went taut. "You are certain?" "I saw it with my own eyes. In my father's study." She pressed the heels of her hands against her forehead, trying to slow the racing of her own thoughts. "Which means the uprising wasn't an uprising at all. Which means someone needed a war to cover a theft. Which means your brother might have been killed not for breaking treaty, but for finding out the truth, before he could tell anyone." "Pratt," Delshay said, the name coming out of him like something bitten off. "There's more," Odessa said, and here her voice dropped, urgent now, because this was the part that had made her ride like the devil himself was behind her. "I heard talk before I left. A sweep. My father's ordering a patrol into the northern foothills within the week. Officially to root out raiders." She met his eyes. "But if Pratt has men in my father's ear, if he's the one feeding intelligence about where your people are camped." She didn't need to finish it. Delshay's face had already gone hard, and still, the look of a man doing arithmetic with lives. "How many days?" 5. Maybe 6. "Then we have little time," he said, half to himself, already turning to scan the tree-line, as though the answer to what came next might be written somewhere in the pines. "I'll find out more," Odessa said. "Whatever's in that study, I'll find it. I swear it to you, Delshay." He turned back to her. And for a moment the hard soldier's calculation in his face gave way to something else entirely, something raw, and grateful, and afraid all at once. "Why?" he asked quietly. "Why risk this?" "For my people. For me." Odessa reached up, pressed her palm flat against his chest, over the place where the medicine pouch hung against his skin. "Because I told you once," she said. "I believe in judging people by their actions, not by what others say about them." Her voice caught. "And because whatever this is between us, I am not walking away from it because it's dangerous. I've spent my whole life being safe, Delshay. I am tired of it." He said nothing. Simply pulled her against him, one hand tangling in her hair, and held on the way a man holds onto the one solid thing in a world that has just tilted sideways beneath his feet. They did not have 5 days. They had, in the end, only that afternoon, and one more morning, because word came down faster than either of them expected, a rider, from the fort, 2 days later, bringing news that the patrol had been moved up. 3 days instead of 6. Someone, it seemed, was in a hurry. Odessa rode for the falls one last time, before the deadline closed in on them both, and found Delshay already waiting, a leanness in his shoulders, that spoke of a night without sleep. "You should not have come," he said. "If they are watching the roads. I had to see you." Odessa. Her name in his mouth had weight now. Gravity. "I must go. Warn what remains of my brother's people. Move them before the soldiers come." His hand found her face, thumb tracing the line of her jaw, with a tenderness that made her chest ache. "I do not know how long." "Then I'll wait," she said, and her voice did not shake, though everything else in her did. "However long it takes." He was quiet a moment. Then, from the pouch at his hip, he drew something else, a second stone, smaller than the first, dark where the other was pale blue. "Black stone," he said, pressing it into her palm alongside the first. "For the truth you carry now. It is heavy. This will help you hold it." Odessa closed her fist around both stones, the weight of them strange, and grounding against her palm. "When will I see you again?" "I cannot say." His eyes burned into hers, fierce and certain in a way that steadied something trembling in her chest. "But I make you this vow, Odessa Hale. I will come back for you. And when I do, I will bring proof enough to burn Pratt's lies to the ground. My brother's death will not stay buried beneath a false paper. I'll be ready," she whispered. "Whatever proof you find. Whatever it costs." He kissed her then, once, hard enough to seal the promise, into her skin, and then he was gone, into the trees, into the gathering dusk, into a war that had just become, for Odessa Hale, something far more personal than lines on a map at her father's supper table. She rode back to Fort Bracken in the dark, the two stones cold now against her collarbone, her mind turning over everything she had seen in that ledger, everything Delshay had told her, every piece of a puzzle that refused, so far, to show her its whole shape. Her father was waiting on the porch when she arrived. Uniform still buttoned. Face unreadable in the lamplight. "Late again," he said. "I lost track of time." "You do that often now." He studied her the way he studied a map, before a campaign, searching for the terrain he couldn't yet see. "You've changed these past weeks, Odessa." For one terrible second she thought he knew everything. The waterfall. Delshay. The ledger she had touched, with her own two hands, and closed again, without a word. "Have I?" she managed. "You're quieter," he said. "And yet, somehow, less afraid of me than you used to be." A pause, something almost like curiosity crossing his weathered face. "I don't know whether to be pleased or concerned." "Perhaps a little of both, father," she said, and slipped past him, into the house, before he could ask anything further, her heart hammering the whole way up the stairs. Behind her closed door, she sat on the edge of her narrow bed, and opened her fist. Two stones. One pale, one dark. A promise and a warning, carried home together in the same closed hand. Outside her window, the mountain sat dark, and patient against the stars, keeping, for now, every secret she had asked them to keep. But not forever. She understood that now. Understood it the way you understand weather coming, long before the first drop of rain, that whatever storm was building out there in Cyrus Pratt's ledgers, and her father's orders, and Delshay's vow to return, it would not stay contained in these hills much longer. It would come to Fort Bracken eventually. And when it did, Odessa Hale intended to be standing exactly where the truth could find her. Not hidden behind good posture and proper manners. Not folded quietly into the shape her father had built for her. Standing. Waiting. Ready. The mountains did not keep time the way men did. 5 years passed over Fort Bracken like weather passes over stone. Slow. Then all at once you look up, and everything has changed shape, and you cannot say exactly when. Odessa Hale was 23 now. And the girl, who used to climb out, through her bedroom window, the girl who used to lie about headaches, that girl was gone. Buried somewhere under calluses, and account ledgers, and the particular exhaustion of running 4,000 acres, with nothing but stubbornness, and a foreman named Raphael, who trusted her more than most men trusted their own wives. Because that was the thing nobody warned her about. Freedom didn't feel like flying. It felt like work. Endless, backbreaking, sun-up to sundown work, and she loved it anyway, loved it the way you love a wound, that finally stopped hurting, because you'd built enough scar tissue over it to forget the original cut. The ranch had been her uncle's. Then it was hers. Then it was, according to every rancher, and merchant and army wife, from here to Santa Fe, a scandal, a woman running cattle, and breeding horses, and turning a profit doing it, without a husband's name stamped over the deed. She didn't care. Not anymore. Or that's what she told herself. Most days it was even true. Miss Hale. Raphael's voice, calling from the corral fence, cutting through whatever thought had her standing frozen in the yard again, staring west toward the mountains like the mountains owed her something. The seed sacks. North shed or south? North, she called back. Off the ground this time. We lost half the barley to mice last season. See, Miss Hale. He moved off, shouting orders to the other hands, and Odessa let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Because that happened now. Standing still, staring at nothing, 5 years of habit she couldn't quite break. Watching the tree lean. Waiting for a shape that never came. Agatha found her there a few minutes later, a stack of letters in one weathered hand. Mail's in. Anything urgent? Depends what you call urgent. Agatha's mouth pulled into something that wasn't quite a smile. Another letter from your father. Odessa's shoulders dropped half an inch. Just half an inch. Enough that Agatha noticed, because Agatha noticed everything, had noticed everything for 20 years, which was exactly the problem. And Captain Marsh sends word he'll call this afternoon, Agatha added, watching Odessa's face the way a woman watches a pot she suspects is about to boil over. Says he has important business. I'm certain he does. Inside the cool adobe walls of the house, hers, a word she still sometimes tested silently in her own mouth just to feel the shape of it, Odessa washed the trail dust from her hands, and sat at the desk that had once belonged to her uncle. Her father's letter waited on top of the stack. She already knew what it said, before she broke the seal. Knew the shape of the sentences, the particular cadence of a man, who had spent 30 years giving orders, and had never once learned how to ask. Captain Marsh has expressed his continued interest in your hand despite your previous refusals. He is a fine officer with excellent prospects. I have given him leave to call upon you again, and I expect you to receive him with the courtesy his station deserves. Odessa folded the letter. Placed it in the drawer with the others. There were perhaps 30 of them in there now, 5 years of the same argument written in different words, and she had started to think of that drawer less as correspondence and more as a kind of grave. She reached instead for the drawer beneath it. The locked one. Because that was where the Real letters lived. 5 years of clippings. Land office records, copied by hand, from documents she'd bribed a clerk in Santa Fe to let her see. Bills of sale, with Cyrus Pratt's signature at the bottom, dated, cross-referenced, building, slowly, patiently, the way you build a dam one stone at a time, into something that could not be argued away. She had not stopped. Not once. Not in 5 years. Which was more than she could say for her faith, that he was coming back. That part had gotten harder. Not gone. Never gone. But harder, some nights, to hold on to, when the moon came full, and she took the 2 stones, from the small pouch she kept them in now, the pale one, and the dark one, worn smooth from handling, and pressed them to her chest, and wondered whether she was sending her thoughts out, into the mountains, or whether she was simply talking to herself. She refused to finish that thought most days. Today was one of the days she managed it. Captain Silas Marsh arrived precisely at 3, because Silas Marsh was a man, who arrived precisely at things, his uniform pressed, his boots polished enough to throw back the afternoon sun in a way that made Odessa's eyes ache just looking at him. He was not, she reminded herself again, a bad man. That was the maddening part. If he'd been cruel, this would have been easy. If he'd been foolish, or vain, or careless with her the way so many officers were careless, with women they considered a prize to be won, easy. She could have hated him cleanly, and sent him away, without a second thought. Instead he was decent. Thoughtful, even, in his stiff military way. And underneath the decency, if you looked long enough, and Odessa had looked, over 5 years, more than she wanted to admit, there was something else. Something that flinched. Miss Hale. He removed his hat at the door. You're looking well, Captain. She gestured him toward the front room. What brings you today? He didn't answer right away. Which was unlike him. Silas Marsh did not hesitate, generally, he simply spoke, because hesitation was a luxury officers weren't supposed to have. Might we speak privately? Agatha, hovering in the doorway, with the particular vigilance of a woman, who had appointed herself guardian of Odessa's virtue whether Odessa wanted a guardian or not, withdrew with obvious reluctance. Once alone, Marsh's formal bearing softened. Just slightly. Enough that Odessa noticed. Your father's concerned, he said. We all are. I've heard this before, Silas, she said. Something crossed his face at that. Quick. Gone before she could name it. There's been trouble, he said instead. 3 homesteads burned north of here. And there are rumors, he stopped himself. What rumors? That the man leading the raids isn't just some raider off the reservation. Marsh's jaw worked. They're calling him Iron Blade. Says he hits soldier patrols specifically. Not homesteads, mostly. Not civilians. Soldiers. A pause. Your father's convinced it's personal. Some old grudge, from the Larkspur fighting, years back. Odessa's pulse did something complicated in her chest. Because she knew that name. Had known it for 2 years now, reading it in newspaper columns, with her heart in her throat every single time, searching each account for some detail that would tell her, one way or another, whether the man behind that name was the one she still, after all this time, could not stop waiting for. She kept her face very still. And what does this have to do with me, Captain? Your father commanded the campaign that started it all, Marsh said quietly. If this Iron Blade knew, whose daughter lived alone on an isolated ranch. I'm hardly alone. I have Raphael. A dozen hands. 2 dogs who'd wake the dead. Odessa. Her name, unadorned by rank or title, landed strangely in the quiet room. I've admired you a long time. You know that. I would let you keep this ranch, keep your independence, whatever shape that took. I wouldn't try to change you. He hesitated. I only want you safe. For one dizzy second she let herself actually consider it. 5 years was a long time to wait on a ghost. Long enough that some nights the ghost felt more like a story she'd told herself once, a girl's fever dream by a waterfall, than an actual man, with actual hands, that had once actually held her. Then the stones, warm against her sternum beneath her collar, seemed to pulse. A small, stubborn heat. I'm sorry, Silas, she said, gentle as she could make it. My answer hasn't changed. His jaw tightened. He nodded once, stiff, a soldier absorbing an order he disliked. Your father asked me to deliver a message, then. He reached into his coat, produced a folded page, held it out like it weighed more than paper should. He says if you won't accept my suit, you're to return to Fort Bracken. For your safety. By month's end. And if I refuse both? Then he'll send men to escort you back, Marsh said, quiet and unhappy. Willing or not. That night, Odessa stood on her porch, and looked west, the way she'd looked west 1,000 nights, before this one, and let herself say the thing she never let herself say out loud. Where are you, Delshay? The wind gave her nothing back. Just the far-off complaint of a coyote, and the dry rattle of cottonwood leaves, and Odessa went inside, before the silence could say anything crueler than that. 3 nights later, the sky broke open. It was the kind of storm the territory only produced once, or twice a season, lightning stitching the horizon in long white seams, thunder that seemed to come up, through the ground instead of down out of the sky, rain hammering the roof, so hard Odessa could barely hear her own thoughts over it. Which was maybe why she almost missed the dogs. Not their usual bark. Not the bark for coyotes, or strange cattle, or the drifter, who sometimes wandered too close to the north fence. This was different. Lower. The bark that meant a man, and every hair on Odessa's arm stood up at once. Agatha. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. The shotgun. My room. Agatha's face went white, but she moved, fast for a woman her age, and Odessa crossed to the window, with her heart slamming against her ribs. Lightning cracked. For one white-hot second the yard lit up like noon. A figure. Beside the corral. Tall. Still. Gone again before she could be sure of anything. Here. Agatha, breathless, pressing the shotgun into her hands. Should I load? Already loaded. Odessa didn't look away from the window. Stay inside. Bar the door. If I'm not back in 10 minutes, fire 3 shots. That'll bring Raphael running. You're going out there? In this? Agatha. Sharp now. The door. She stepped out, into rain that hit like gravel thrown, from a great height, the shotgun raised, every instinct in her body screaming at once, and none of them screaming louder than the small, insane hope she couldn't quite kill no matter how many years she'd had to try. Who's there? She called, voice swallowed half by the storm. This is private property. Lightning again. Closer this time. The figure had moved, was standing at the edge of the yard now, close enough that she could see the shape of him properly, the breadth of his shoulders, the wet gleam of skin. Stop where you are, she shouted. Identify yourself. The wind shifted. And carried a voice across the yard, that stopped her heart cold in her chest. Odessa Hale. Not a question. A fact. Spoken in a voice she had heard in her dreams for 5 straight years, and the shotgun sagged in her grip like her hands had simply forgotten what they were for. Delshay. Barely a whisper. Then louder, disbelieving. Delshay, is that you? Lightning held longer this time, and in that long white flash she saw him fully. Broader than she remembered. Leaner in the face. New scars tracing his chest, and arms like a map of everything that had happened to him in the years she hadn't been there to see it. But the eyes were exactly the same. Dark. Fixed on her like she was the only solid thing left standing in the whole flooded world. The shotgun fell out of her hands entirely. He crossed the yard in 3 strides, and then he was there, real, solid, rain streaming down both their faces, as his arms closed around her hard enough to bruise, and neither of them moved to seek shelter, both too afraid. She understood this, without either of them saying it, that if they let go, the other might simply dissolve back, into the storm, that had produced him. You came back, she said against his chest, sobbing now, unable to stop it. I promised. His hand found the pouch at her collar, fingers tracing the small hard shapes of the stones, through the wet fabric. You kept them, he said. Both. Agatha's shout cracked, through the rain a moment later, a lantern swinging wildly in one hand, the other reaching for the pistol at her hip, when she saw the shape of the man Odessa was wrapped around. Miss Hale. Get away from him. Agatha, no. Odessa stepped in front of Delshay, without thinking, without hesitation, the way you step in front of something that matters more than your own skin. He's a friend. Agatha's mouth fell open. Her hand dropped from the pistol, slow, uncertain, and Odessa took Delshay's hand, and pulled him toward the house, before the older woman could recover enough words to argue. In the warm kitchen, dripping onto the floorboards, Delshay looked older than 5 years should have made him. Not just the scars. Something behind the eyes too. A weight he was carrying, that hadn't been there by the waterfall. You've been fighting, Odessa said, toweling his hair, tracing one new scar along his jaw, with fingers that wouldn't quite stop shaking. Yes. His voice went low. Flat. The voice of a man reporting facts he'd rather not report. Your father's soldiers found what remained of my brother's camp 3 summers past. Called it justice for the uprising. His jaw worked. Women. Children. I was the only one who escaped. Odessa's stomach turned over entirely. I didn't know, she whispered. God, Delshay, I didn't know. Why would you? Bitter now. Newspapers do not print Apache grief. Only Apache raids. His hand found her face anyway, gentle despite everything hardening in his voice. After the massacre, I became what they call Iron Blade. Led what remained of my people's warriors against the soldiers, who did it. The room went very still. Iron Blade. Odessa's voice barely made it out of her throat. Delshay, that's you? You're the man my father's been hunting for 2 years. He nodded once. Watching her face carefully, like he was waiting to see which way she'd break. Captain Marsh was here 3 days ago, she said slowly, the pieces sliding together, with a horrible clarity. Warning me that Iron Blade's band was operating near this ranch. That my father led the campaign, that started all of it. Your father ordered the attack on our winter camp, Delshay said. Said we broke treaty, hunting land that was forbidden us. His eyes darkened. We were starving, Odessa. The agent stole what was promised. Pratt stole it. The name landed like a struck bell. Pratt, she breathed. Delshay, I never stopped. 5 years, I never stopped gathering what I could find on him. Land sales, bills, dates that don't match the story anyone's ever been told. She pulled him toward the small locked drawer, hands trembling as she worked the key. Look. Look at this. She spread the papers across the table between them, 5 years of patient, quiet, dangerous work laid bare in the lamplight, and watched Delshay's face change, as he understood, piece by piece, what she'd built, while he'd been gone. You did this, he said. Not quite a question. Something closer to disbelief. Alone. I told you I'd find the proof. Her voice cracked. I told you, Delshay. I didn't wait 5 years doing nothing. He looked up at her, and something in his face broke open entirely, grief, and gratitude and something, that might have been awe, all tangled together, and he pulled her against him again, tighter this time, his mouth pressed to her hair. I thought, he said, muffled, I would come back, and find you married. Gone. Safe somewhere far from all this. I told you I'd wait. 5 years is long time to keep a promise to a man, who might already be dead. You're not dead. Fierce now, pulling back to look at him properly. You're standing in my kitchen dripping on my floor, and you are not dead, Delshay, so don't you dare talk to me like a ghost. Something that was almost a laugh escaped him. Almost. They talked until the storm wore itself out sometime past 3 in the morning. Delshay laid out what he knew, soldier movements, a supply line running to Pratt's trading post, that had nothing to do with any legitimate contract, whispers among the few Apache scouts still willing to speak with him that Pratt had been selling arms, as well as land, playing both sides of a war he'd engineered for his own profit. Odessa laid out the ledger. 5 years of it. Dates, names, a slow tightening noose built one signature at a time. Together, Delshay said finally, "This is enough. Enough to burn him." "Not from here." Odessa shook her head. "Not with my father convinced you're the enemy, and Pratt whispering in every ear that matters. We need somewhere safe. Somewhere to gather the rest of what we need, without soldiers on our doorstep." "There is a place," Delshay said slowly. "High in the mountains. Valley the soldiers do not know. I found it after the massacre, healing. Built shelter there, waiting." He stopped. Started again. "Waiting for a day I was not certain would come. Waiting for me." He nodded. "Then that's where we go," Odessa said. "We finish this from there. Away from Pratt's reach. Away from my father's men. And when we have enough," her jaw set, the same stubborn set her father wore, when he'd made up his mind about something, and intended to see it, through no matter the cost. "We bring it back. All of it. In the open. Where no one can bury it again." They had 3 days. 3 days to plan, to gather what they'd need, to find a way past a ranch full of hired hands, and a fort full of soldiers, and a father, who had, in the last letter alone, given her until month's end, before he sent men to drag her home. Except the world, it turned out, did not intend to give them 3 quiet days. On the second morning, dust rose on the horizon. Riders. Not the ragged gallop of a scouting patrol, but the steady, deliberate pace of men, who had somewhere specific to be. 6 of them. Odessa's stomach dropped straight through the floor. Delshay. She was already moving, pulling him toward the root cellar off the kitchen, heart hammering. "Down. Now. Please." He went without argument, which told her more than anything how dangerous he understood this to be, and she had just enough time to smooth her skirt, and arrange her face, into something resembling calm, before Captain Silas Marsh dismounted in her yard. "Miss Hale." He removed his hat. "I hope we find you well." "Captain." Cool. Composed. Every ounce of training her father had ever drilled into her about masking what she felt now put to use against the very man who'd taught her. "This is unexpected. Your father sent us." He didn't receive a reply to his letter. Marsh's eyes moved across the yard, sharp, assessing, a soldier's eyes, that missed very little. "We're to ensure your safety. Escort you back to the fort, if you've decided to accept his protection." "I haven't decided anything yet." "There've been reports," Marsh said, lower now, stepping closer so the men behind him wouldn't hear. "Apache scouts seen near this property." Odessa, her name again, unguarded, and she hated how much it still cost her to hear the worry underneath it. "If you're in some kind of trouble, you could tell me." Because there it was. The moment. The one where a smarter, safer version of herself might have simply said yes, help me, and let this whole impossible thing dissolve into something manageable. She looked at him, and thought of 5 years of ledgers hidden in a locked drawer. Thought of a man crouched in her root cellar right now, with his hand probably resting on a knife, listening to every word. "There's nothing to tell, Captain," she said. "I appreciate the concern. Truly. But it's misplaced." Marsh studied her a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes, not quite suspicion, not quite disappointment, something sadder and more complicated than either. "We'll be staying the night," he said finally. "Colonel's orders." Of course they would. The night stretched out like a held breath. Marsh posted sentries. Made himself comfortable in the guest room across the hall, from Odessa's own, and Odessa lay fully dressed on top of her covers, riding clothes already on beneath a dressing gown, listening to every creak of the house, and calculating, over and over, how in God's name she was going to get an Apache war leader out of her root cellar, and past 6 armed soldiers, without a single shot fired. Because that was the arithmetic now. Not love. Not longing. Just numbers. 6 soldiers. 1 root cellar. A window of darkness, that would not last forever. Agatha came to her sometime near midnight, slipping into the room, without knocking, and for one terrible second Odessa thought. "I know," Agatha whispered, before Odessa could even form the question. "I know he's down there. I've known since I brought the captain his tea, and heard the floor creak wrong under my feet." "Agatha. I'm not here to stop you." The older woman's face, in the low light, looked suddenly much older than Odessa had ever let herself notice. "I watched you grow up in a house, where every door was locked for your own good. I won't be the one, who locks the last one." She pressed something into Odessa's hand. "Small vial. For the captain's evening tea, next round. Nothing dangerous. Just sleep, deep enough to buy you time." Odessa stared at her. "You'd do this? After everything you've said?" "I said what I thought I was supposed to say." Agatha's eyes were wet now. "Watching you tonight, standing in that yard lying to a good man's face, without so much as a tremor, I understood something, child. You were never going to be talked out of this. The only choice left to me is whether I help you live through it." The soldiers slept 2 hours, before midnight shift change. Marsh, deep under Agatha's careful herbcraft, did not stir, when Odessa slipped past his door. Raphael was waiting behind the orchard, with 2 horses saddled, exactly where Agatha's whispered instructions had promised he'd be. "Hurry, Miss Hale," he murmured. "The others won't sleep forever." Delshay emerged from the cellar like a shadow detaching itself, from darker shadow, silent, alert, already scanning the yard for the sentries Odessa knew were posted somewhere near the front gate. They almost made it. They were nearly to the tree lean, nearly, so close Odessa could already taste the relief of it, when a voice cracked out of the dark. "Halt! Who goes there?" Not one of Marsh's men. A stranger. Rifle already up, already leveled, stepping out from behind the old lightning-split cottonwood at the edge of the property like he'd been waiting there the whole night specifically for them. Because that was the detail that would haunt Odessa later, replaying it over and over in the sleepless weeks that followed. Not a soldier. A hired gun. Someone who had known exactly which tree to wait behind, on exactly which night, which meant someone had known they were leaving. Which meant someone had talked. Which meant Pratt. There wasn't time to think it through. There wasn't time for anything except Delshay shoving her sideways, hard, off the path, and into brush, as the rifle fired, the crack of it splitting the night wide open, and Odessa hit the ground hard enough to lose her breath entirely. Delshay. Another shot. And this time she heard the sound that would live in her chest for the rest of her life, not the crack of the rifle, but the sound, after it, the grunt, low and terrible, the sound of a body absorbing something it was never built to absorb. "Go," Delshay gasped, already moving, already dragging her up by the arm even, as she felt something wet and warm smear across her hand, where she'd grabbed for him. "Odessa, go. Not without you. Go." The horses. Somehow they made the horses, Raphael already firing back, into the dark to buy them the 2 seconds they needed, and Odessa found herself in the saddle, with no memory of climbing, into it, Delshay somehow beside her, though he was listing badly now, one hand pressed hard against his side, the other barely holding the reins. They rode. Because there was nothing else to do, but ride, the trail narrow, and black and murderous in the dark, Delshay's horse falling half a length behind hers, and then a full length, and then. The ravine came up out of nowhere. A shelf of trail, that gave way, in the dark, to a drop none of them had seen coming, and Odessa heard it, before she understood it, the scream of a horse, the crack of brush, and Delshay's voice, cut off mid-warning, swallowed whole by the dark below the trail. Delshay. She wheeled her horse back, so hard the animal nearly went down under her. Scrambled off before it had even fully stopped, half falling down the loose scree at the ravine's edge, screaming his name, into a darkness, that gave her nothing back. No answer. No sound at all except the distant, receding crash of something, someone, moving away, through brush far below, too far, too fast, gone. Delshay. Delshay, please. Raphael's hands were on her then, pulling her back, from the edge, before she went, over it herself, his voice low, and urgent in her ear. Miss Hale, the soldiers, they'll be on us any moment, we cannot. I'm not leaving him. You cannot climb down there in the dark, you'll die too, and then what was any of it for? She didn't remember agreeing. Didn't remember the ride back, through the pines, with her whole chest hollowed out, and screaming, didn't remember much of anything except the taste of Delshay's blood still drying on her palm, and the terrible, echoing silence where his voice should have been. By the time false dawn broke gray, over the mountains, Odessa Hale sat frozen in her own kitchen, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she had no memory of pouring, staring at nothing, and somewhere deep inside her a voice she couldn't silence kept repeating the same 4 words. He is gone. He is gone. He is gone. She did not know, could not have known, sitting there in that gray dawn, with grief closing over her like water over a stone, that 2 miles downstream, at the bottom of that same ravine, Raphael had turned his horse around the moment he'd gotten Odessa safely inside the house. That he had climbed down, through brush and loose rock in the last hour of darkness, following a trail of blood too faint for anyone, but a man who'd spent 30 years reading tracks across this exact stretch of country. That he had found Delshay half submerged in the shallow creek at the ravine's bottom, unconscious, breathing, barely, one hand still curled tight around a small dark stone he must have torn, from Odessa's pouch, as he fell, as though even dying he could not let go of it. That Raphael, working alone in the last hour, before sunrise, had done the only thing a man in his position could do. He had carried him out. Hidden him. And told no one, not one living soul, not even Agatha, not even Odessa herself, weeping 10 feet above him in a kitchen, that felt, that morning, like the loneliest room in the entire territory. That Delshay was still, somehow, against every reasonable expectation of, that terrible night, alive. Grief does not arrive the way people describe it. It does not crash over you like a wave. It seeps. Slow, patient, filling every low place in a person, until there is nothing left standing dry. Odessa Hale learned that in the weeks after the ravine. She learned it standing in the kitchen at 3 in the morning, with a cup of coffee gone cold in her hands. Learned it in the barn, halfway through saddling a horse for a ride she no longer had any reason to take. Learned it especially at night, because night was, when the mountains used to give her something back, and now they gave her nothing at all. Just dark. Just silence. Just the shape of a man, who was not coming down out of the treeline ever again. She did not cry in front of Raphael. Did not cry in front of Agatha either, not after that first terrible morning, because crying required a kind of hope, that this was survivable, and some days she did not have that hope to spare. She kept moving, because moving was easier than stopping. Because if she stopped, even for a moment, the thought would catch her. Would sit down across from her at the table, and refuse to leave. He is gone. Except some mornings she woke already reaching for the second stone, before she remembered there was no reason left to hold it. Except some nights she caught herself listening for hoofbeats on the western trail, and then caught herself listening, and then hated herself a little for the catching. Which was its own kind of grief, she supposed. Grieving the habit of hope on top of grieving the man himself. Agatha tried, in her clumsy, well-meant way, to to fill the silence with usefulness. More chores. More errands. As if enough motion might eventually outrun sorrow the way a fast enough horse outruns weather. It didn't work. Odessa knew it wouldn't work. She let Agatha try anyway, because refusing would have meant explaining why, and she did not have the strength left over for explaining anything to anyone. What she did not know, because Raphael had not told her, could not tell her, not yet, not while Colonel Hale's men still rode patrols, within a day's ride of the ranch, was, that 2 miles downstream, in a line shack Raphael's own father had built 40 years before and that nobody else on the ranch even remembered existed, Delshay was alive. Barely. For the first 3 days, barely was the only word that applied. Raphael tended him in secret, riding out before dawn under the excuse of checking fence line, carrying water and dressings, and the herb poultices Agatha had once taught half the county's Mexican families to make, back before the county decided which kinds of knowledge were respectable, and which were not. He did not tell Odessa. Could not. Because if the wrong person overheard even a hint of it, a stable hand, a hired gun still lingering in the hills, worse, one of her father's own soldiers, the location would not stay secret long. And a wounded man could not run. So Raphael carried the burden alone. Watched the fever break on the 4th night, sat by a shuttered window, while a man, who had once faced down 6 armed soldiers, without flinching thrashed, and murmured names in a language Raphael did not speak, until finally, on the 5th morning, Delshay opened his eyes, and asked, in a voice like gravel dragged over stone, the only question that mattered to him. Odessa. Alive, Raphael said. Grieving you like you're already in the ground. You should let her know otherwise. Soon as you can sit a horse. Delshay closed his eyes again. Not from pain this time. From something closer to relief, so total it looked, for a moment, almost like its opposite. How long, he rasped, until I can ride? 2 weeks, Raphael said. If you don't kill yourself trying to make it 1. It took 10 days. Because Delshay, it turned out, was exactly as stubborn as the woman he'd nearly died for. The night he came back to her, there was no storm this time. No lightning to announce him. Just an ordinary autumn evening, cold enough that Odessa had a fire going, and a blanket around her shoulders, sitting on the porch the way she sat most evenings now, staring west out of habit more than hope. Which was why, when the shape came out of the tree lean, walking slow and favoring one side, she did not at first believe her own eyes. Because you don't. Because the mind plays that trick on grieving people constantly, conjures the shape of what it wants, until you learn not to trust your own vision anymore. She had seen him a dozen times, that way already, in doorways, at the edge of the corral, always dissolving the moment she blinked. Except this time he didn't dissolve. Except this time he kept walking. Slow. Deliberate. One hand pressed instinctively to his side, where the scar still pulled, with every step. Odessa came off the porch, so fast the blanket fell, from her shoulders, and she did not stop to pick it up. You're dead. Her voice cracked wide open on the words. You're dead, I watched you go, over that ridge, I heard. Not dead. He caught her, before her knees actually gave out, which they very nearly did. Raphael found me. Kept me. Did not tell you. 10 days. She was sobbing now, furious and grateful in the same breath, fists pressed against his chest not quite hard enough to be a real blow. 10 days I thought, Delshay, I buried you 100 times in my head, do you understand that? I buried you every single night. I know. His hand found the back of her head, gentle, steadying. I am sorry for it. There was no safe way to send word. I hate you a little, she said, into his shirt, for making me feel this. I know that too, he murmured. Hate me later. Tonight, just, hold on. So she did. Because there was nothing else worth doing in that moment, nothing that mattered more than the solid, breathing, impossible fact of him. They left within the week. Quieter this time. Smarter, because grief and fear had taught Odessa things about caution that 3 days by a waterfall never could. Raphael arranged the horses. Agatha packed provisions, without a single word of protest, only the fierce, wordless embrace she gave Odessa at the gate, the kind that says everything a person refuses to say out loud. The ride to the valley took 2 full days, climbing through country, so folded and hidden, that Odessa lost her sense of direction entirely somewhere on the first afternoon, and simply trusted Delshay's hands on the reins to know what her own eyes could not. And then, cresting a final ridge in the gold hour, before sunset, she saw it. A valley cupped between peaks like something the mountains had decided to keep just for themselves. Green meadow. A lake catching the last light, so perfectly it looked less like water, and more like a mirror someone had laid flat across the earth. Aspen turning gold at the edges of a stand of dark pine. And a lodge. Small, sturdy, built with a patience that told its own story, a man alone in these mountains for years, working with his hands, because his hands were the only thing he still had left to work with, building a home for a woman he could not be certain would ever come to live in it. "You built this," Odessa said. Not really a question. "For us," Delshay said. "If you still wanted it." She did not answer with words. Some things did not need them. The valley kept them safe, through that winter, and the spring, that followed, and it was, Odessa would think later, the strangest kind of happiness she had ever known, happiness built directly on top of unfinished business, joy with a debt still owing underneath it. Because they had not forgotten Pratt. Had not forgotten the ledger, still hidden in a false bottom of Odessa's travel trunk, still growing, page by careful page, as Delshay brought back fragments gathered, from scouts and traders, who still, even now, trusted an Apache man's word, over a white agent's. But some debts, it turned out, could wait for spring without rotting. The first snow came early, that year, dusting the high peaks, while the meadow below still held, onto the last of its green, and Odessa stood in the doorway of the lodge watching it fall, and understood, for the first time in her adult life, what it meant to simply have nowhere else she needed to be. "You are thinking too loud again," Delshay said, coming up behind her, resting his chin against the crown of her head. "I can hear it from across the room. I'm thinking that I used to believe quiet was something you earned," she said. "After enough work. Enough proving yourself." She leaned back into him. "I didn't know it could just be given. Like this." "It was not given," Delshay said. "You built it. Same as everything else you have ever wanted." A pause, his arms tightening slightly around her. "I only helped carry the wood." She laughed, the sound surprising her, with how easily it came now, how far it had traveled, from the woman, who used to laugh only behind locked doors, and closed curtains at Fort Bracken. That winter he taught her the rest of what the mountain still had to teach, how to read a coming storm 3 days out by the particular way the light bent, over the western ridge, how to set snares, that fed a household, without stripping a valley bare, how to sit still long enough, that a deer might wander close enough to touch, before some small, involuntary motion sent it bolting. She taught him things too. How to keep books the way her uncle had taught her, columns and sums, that would matter enormously once the ledger they were building finally saw daylight in a courtroom. How certain plants she remembered, from her mother's garden, brought west in seed packets nobody else out here had thought to carry, might take root even at this altitude, if you were patient, and stubborn enough about it. They were both, by now, considerably practiced at patient and stubborn. By the following winter, there was a cradle in the corner of the lodge, carved from aspen wood by hands, that had once carried a knife, into war and now, more often, carried an infant instead. Wren arrived in the coldest week of the year, squalling into a world her parents had built, with their bare hands out of nothing, but stubbornness and love, and a stolen ledger, and Odessa held her daughter for the first time, and understood, with a clarity, that frightened her a little, exactly how far she would go to protect this. Further than she had already gone. That much she knew. She has your eyes, Odessa whispered, that first exhausted, radiant night, watching Delshay hold their daughter like she might shatter. And your stubbornness, I think, he said. Already. Listen to her. Ren, as if summoned, let out a wail, that could probably be heard clear to the ridge line, and Delshay laughed, a real laugh, rare and full, the kind Odessa had only heard from him perhaps 3 times in all their years together, and something in her chest loosened, that had been tight, since the night of the ravine. For a while, in that hidden valley, it was almost possible to believe the world outside had forgotten they existed. Almost. Ren was 7 months old, sturdy and dark-eyed, and already crawling, with an alarming, determined speed, when Raphael came up the hidden trail at a gallop, that told Odessa everything, before he said a single word. She was in the garden, when she heard the hoofbeats. Straightened up too fast, dirt still on her hands, heart already climbing, into her throat. Because a gallop meant urgency. And urgency, in a valley nobody was supposed to be able to find, meant only one thing. Raphael. She was already moving toward him, before he'd even brought the horse to a full stop. What's happened? Soldiers. He swung down, breathless, dust caked into every line of his weathered face. 3 days out, maybe less. Following the trail from the Cazadero trading post. His jaw tightened. A trader talked. Said an Apache man had been buying supplies, with turquoise for trade, mentioned a hidden valley, mentioned, he hesitated. Say it. Mentioned a white woman with him. And a child. The garden seemed to tilt slightly under Odessa's feet. My father. Leading them himself, Raphael confirmed. And Captain Marsh riding with him. That much I'm certain of. He paused, weighing something. There's more, and I don't like the shape of it. Tell me. Word at the trading post is Pratt petitioned the fort directly. Said Iron Blade, Delshay, was harboring stolen army intelligence. Said it justified sending a full column instead of a small patrol. Raphael's eyes were dark with worry. Miss Hale, this isn't your father coming to bring you home anymore. This is Pratt using your father's soldiers to finish something, before the truth about him can ever reach daylight. Delshay had come out of the lodge by then, Ren balanced on one hip, with the easy confidence of a man, who had learned fatherhood the same way he'd learned everything else in his life, by simply refusing to fail at it. His face, hearing this, went carefully, dangerously still. How many soldiers? A full column. 15, maybe 20. Then we run, Delshay said. Deeper into the mountains. There are places even I have not. No. Odessa's voice cut, through the yard, flat and certain, surprising even herself, with how little it shook. We don't run. Both men turned to look at her. Odessa. Delshay's voice had gone careful. 20 soldiers. Are coming because Pratt told them a lie he needs them to believe. She was already moving toward the lodge, toward the trunk, toward years of patient, dangerous work. So we don't run from the lie. We meet it. With the truth. That truth is not proof against 20 rifles, Delshay said quietly. It's proof against my father. She turned back to face him, and something in her expression made even Raphael go still. He's a hard man. A proud man. But I have known him my entire life, and whatever else he has never once been a man, who could look directly at the truth, and simply choose to ignore it. That's not who he is. It's why he's dangerous to Pratt in the first place, because if he ever actually sees what's in that ledger, he won't be able to walk away from it. And if you are wrong, Delshay said. If pride wins over truth, that day. Odessa looked down at Ren, reaching one small hand toward her father's jaw, gurgling something that might have been an opinion on the matter, if she'd had the words for it yet. Then at least she'll know, Odessa said quietly, that her mother didn't hide from it. They had 3 days to prepare. Which, Odessa thought grimly, seemed to be the exact amount of time the universe insisted on giving her, before every disaster in her adult life. She spent them the way she'd spent the years before, organizing. Building the case not as a woman defending her own choices, but as a prosecutor laying out a trial, because that was, in the end, precisely what this was going to be. Land sale dates. Signatures. A partial list, gathered painstakingly by Delshay's contacts, over 2 years, of arms shipments, that had gone missing, from army inventory only to surface, later, in the hands of raiders Pratt himself was publicly denouncing. Because that was the shape of it, once you laid every piece side by side. Pratt selling stolen tribal land to mining interests. Pratt selling stolen army rifles to whichever side of the conflict kept the war profitable and endless. Pratt, feeding false intelligence to Colonel Hale for years, keeping the colonel's fury pointed always outward, at Apache raiders, and never once inward, at the man standing quietly at his shoulder collecting a fortune off every drop of blood the war produced. He needs the fighting to continue, Odessa said, laying the final pages out across the lodge table on the evening, before the soldiers were expected. That's the whole of it. Every year of war is another year of profit for him. My father's obsession with catching Iron Blade, that's not just prejudice. Pratt's been feeding it. Deliberately. Because a colonel hunting a ghost never has time to look at his own supply ledgers. Delshay studied the pages a long moment. Ren asleep against his shoulder, one small fist curled into his shirt. Your father believed he was fighting a war, he said slowly. Not knowing he was fighting Pratt's war. For Pratt's money. Yes. That is a hard thing, Delshay said, for a proud man to learn about himself. I know. Odessa's voice was quiet now. But it's the truth. And I would rather hand him the truth myself, on my own ground, than let him keep believing a lie that's cost both our families everything. The night before, Odessa did not sleep. Could not. Lay beside Delshay listening to Ren's small even breathing in the cradle across the room, and ran the whole plan, over and over in her mind, looking for the crack in it, the place where all their careful work might still come apart in a single reckless hour. Because that was the thing about proof. You could gather it for a lifetime, and still not know, until the actual moment, whether the man you handed it to would choose to see it, or choose to look away. Her father had looked away, from a great many things, over the years. From her mother's slow decline. From the particular loneliness of a daughter raised more by silence than by love. From, she suspected, more than a few uncomfortable truths in his own command, that would have been easier to leave buried. Except. And this was the thought she kept returning to, over and over, until it finally let her drift toward something like sleep. Except he had never once, in her entire life, looked away from a fact laid directly, and undeniably in front of him. He had disliked plenty of truths. Disputed plenty of them. But ignored one, outright, staring him in the face. She did not think he had it in him. She was about to find out whether a lifetime of knowing a man was enough to bet everything on. The column arrived on the morning of the 3rd day, exactly as Raphael had predicted, dust rising first, over the eastern ridge, and then the column itself coming, into view, a long dark line of riders threading down, through the pass, into the hidden valley, where Odessa and Delshay had finally built the life they were never supposed to be allowed to have. Odessa stood in the clearing before the lodge. Ren on her hip. Delshay a few careful steps behind, unarmed, visible, deliberately so, because the entire plan depended on the soldiers seeing a man standing in open daylight, and not a shadow fleeing, into the trees. Raphael waited at the edge of the tree lean, having ridden ahead to guide the column in exchange for a promise, extracted, at real personal risk, from Captain Marsh himself, that they would approach without gunfire. The column drew rein at the clearing's edge. Colonel Everett Hale at its head, older than Odessa remembered him, gray threading fully, through hair that had only been graying at the temples the last time she'd stood this close to him. Captain Marsh just behind, and to his left, jaw set, eyes moving carefully between Odessa and the lodge, and the man standing quiet and unarmed beside it. Her father's gaze found her. Found the baby on her hip. He did not dismount right away. Just sat there, a long, terrible moment, absorbing the entire scene in the particular silence Odessa remembered, from every dinner table of her childhood, the silence of a man deciding how much of what he was seeing he was willing to let himself believe. "Odessa," he said finally. "Hello, father." He dismounted slowly. Handed his reins to a soldier, without looking away from her once. Approached with the careful, controlled stride of a man crossing terrain he did not entirely trust. His eyes dropped to the child. "This is your granddaughter," Odessa said. "Wren." Something moved through Colonel Hale's face, that Odessa had never once seen there in her entire life of living under his roof. Not anger, exactly. Not yet. Something closer to a man watching a structure he'd spent his whole life believing load-bearing suddenly, silently, begin to crack. "They told me," he said, voice tight, "that Iron Blade had taken you against your will. That this," his gaze cut, finally, to Delshay, and hardened, "this raider had abducted my daughter." "I came here by choice," Odessa said, clear enough that every soldier in the column heard it. "Years ago. And every day since." "Love," her father said, and the word came out of him like something bitter he'd been forced to swallow. "You'll tell me this is love? With a man who has killed soldiers under my command. Men you sent to hunt him," Odessa said, "for a war that was never real in the first place." The clearing went very still. "Careful," her father said, low. "No." Odessa's voice did not waver. "I've been careful my entire life, father. I am done being careful." She turned, retrieved the leather satchel Raphael had carried up from the lodge, and held it out toward him. "I need you to look at this. All of it. Before you decide what kind of man I've chosen, or what kind of war you've spent years fighting." Colonel Hale did not move to take it. "Everett." Marsh's voice, quiet, urgent, from just behind him. "Sir. I think you should look." The colonel's eyes flicked to his captain. Something passed between the two men, history Odessa didn't fully know the shape of, some old debt of trust, and slowly, reluctantly, Colonel Hale reached out, and took the satchel from his daughter's hands. He read for a long time. Standing in the clearing, soldiers shifting uneasily on their horses behind him, sun climbing higher, Wren fussing softly against Odessa's shoulder, until Delshay reached over and settled her, with a low, steady sound that quieted her almost instantly. Page by page. Land sale after land sale. Dates that lined up, with sickening precision, against every skirmish, every uprising, every dead soldier, and dead Apache the colonel had spent years cataloging in his own official reports. When he finally looked up, something in his face had gone gray in a way that had nothing to do with the color of his hair. "This is Pratt's signature. On every page," Odessa said. "Years of it. The Larkspur Uprising." His voice had dropped to something Odessa had never once heard from him. Not quite a whisper. The voice of a man reading his own gravestone. The one that started all of it. The one that, he stopped himself. "Killed my brother," Delshay said quietly, stepping forward for the first time. "Ordered by you. Because Pratt told you my people broke treaty. When the truth, Colonel Hale, is that Pratt had already sold the land beneath us 3 weeks, before a single shot was fired." Colonel Hale's hands, holding the satchel, were shaking now. Slightly. The kind of tremor a proud man spends a lifetime learning to hide, and could not, in this moment, hide any longer. "I gave the order," he said. "Not to Odessa. Not quite to Delshay either. To something further away, some version of himself he'd been avoiding for years. I gave the order to attack that camp, believing it justified. You believed a lie, Odessa said, gentler now, watching something in her father break open, that she had never once expected to see break. Pratt needed the war to keep making money, father. And you were the sword he used to keep it going. It was Captain Marsh, who broke the silence that followed, and it cost him visibly to do it, his voice rough, with something that sounded almost like grief for a version of his own career he understood, in that moment, he was about to lose. There's more, sir. He stepped forward, produced a folded page of his own, from inside his coat. I've had suspicions about the arms shipments for the better part of a year. Inventory that never matched. I didn't want to believe it either. His eyes found Odessa's, briefly, something like an apology passing between them. But I've kept records. If what Miss Hale has assembled proves the land fraud, mine will prove the weapons. Together it's enough to end him. You knew, Colonel Hale said, and there was something almost wounded in it. How long have you known, Silas? Long enough to be ashamed I didn't act sooner. Marsh's jaw tightened. I told myself I needed more proof, before I brought accusations against a federal agent. The truth is I was afraid of what it would cost me to be right. He looked to Odessa now, steady. I won't make that mistake again. For a long moment nobody spoke. The wind moved, through the pines at the valley's edge, and Wren, sensing the strange gravity of the adults around her, had gone quiet, and wide-eyed against her father's shoulder, watching her grandfather, with the frank, unguarded curiosity only a child, that age can manage. Colonel Hale looked at her. Really looked, for the first time. May I, he said, and the roughness in his voice made the request sound almost foreign coming out of a man, who had spent 30 years only ever issuing commands. Odessa hesitated. Looked to Delshay. He gave the smallest nod. She crossed the clearing, and placed her daughter carefully, into her father's arms. Colonel Hale held his granddaughter the way a man holds something he is terrified of breaking, and terrified, in equal measure, of dropping. Wren studied him, with dark, solemn eyes and then, without warning, reached up and closed one small fist around the collar of his uniform, the exact same gesture Odessa herself had made, as an infant, according to every story Agatha had ever told her. She has Mary's chin, the colonel said quietly. His wife's name. Odessa's mother's name, spoken aloud for the first time in years. And it seems, her mother's temperament already. A ghost of something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. The nearest thing to one Odessa had seen, from him in a very long time. It was into that fragile, unfinished quiet that the second rider came. Alone. Hard-ridden, his horse lathered white, with effort, cresting the ridge, from the same trail the column had used, and coming down, into the valley at a pace, that told everyone watching, instantly, that something had gone wrong. Colonel, the rider called, still 50 yards out. Colonel Hale. It was one of the fort's junior officers, young, breathless, reining hard into the clearing. Sir, Agent Pratt. He rode out, from the trading post 2 days back, with 4 hired men, sir, the moment word reached him you'd left, with the column. Said he was coming to, quote, finish what the army wouldn't. The young officer's eyes cut, wide and uncertain, toward Delshay and the lodge behind him. We tried to catch him, sir, but he had too much of a head start. He could be less than an hour behind me. The clearing went cold in an instant. Because that was the piece none of them had accounted for. Not Pratt sending soldiers to do his dirty work. Pratt coming himself, with men paid to make certain no ledger, no ranger, no living witness would ever reach a courtroom to say his name aloud. He knows we're exposed, Odessa breathed. He knows if my father sees the proof. Then he intends to make certain the colonel never gets the chance to act on it, Delshay finished grimly, already moving, scanning the tree line, with the flat, assessing focus of a man doing arithmetic, with lives once again, the same look Odessa had seen on him the night this whole nightmare had first begun. Colonel Hale, to his credit, and Odessa would think of this moment for the rest of her life, as the instant her father finally, truly, became someone she recognized as worth the years of waiting, did not hesitate. Positions, he barked, and 20 soldiers moved, as one, the discipline of a lifetime snapping instantly, into place even, as the ground beneath their loyalties had just shifted entirely. Marsh, with me. Raphael, the colonel's eyes found the ranch foreman, a stranger to him still, and yet, in this moment, an ally without question. Get my daughter and granddaughter to cover. I'm not hiding, Odessa said. Odessa. Her father's voice cracked like a whip, the old command reflex, and then, softer, something new underneath it. Please. I have just found you again. I am not prepared to lose you a second time in the same hour. She looked at Delshay. He nodded once, already checking the rifle Raphael had quietly handed him. Take her, Odessa said, passing Ren into Raphael's arms, her hands lingering one extra second on her daughter's small back. Keep her safe. Whatever happens. Pratt's men came down out of the eastern treeline 20 minutes later, for hired guns, and Cyrus Pratt himself at their center, a man Odessa had never once laid eyes on despite years of assembling his ruin on paper, and found, instead of a lone Apache man, and an isolated cabin ripe for a quiet, deniable killing, a full military column arrayed, and waiting for them across the clearing. Pratt's horse shied at the sight, and Odessa, watching from behind the low stone wall of the garden, with Delshay crouched beside her, saw the exact moment the man's face went, from confident to calculating to, finally, afraid. Colonel Hale. Pratt's voice carried across the clearing, too smooth, too practiced, the voice of a man, who had talked his way out of worse rooms than this one. I confess I didn't expect to find you here ahead of me. I came to assist. Word reached me, that the notorious iron blade had been located. Save it, Pratt. Colonel Hale's voice cut across the clearing like a blade. I've read your ledger. Every page. Something flickered behind Pratt's eyes. Quick. Gone. The look of a gambler recalculating odds, that had just collapsed entirely. I don't know what lies you've been fed, Colonel, but a woman living in sin, with a savage in the wilderness is hardly a reliable. The land sail on the Larkspur watershed, Colonel Hale said, and his voice did not rise, which somehow made it more terrible than shouting would have. Dated 3 weeks, before the uprising you personally reported to me. Your signature. I have it here, in your own hand, and I have Captain Marsh's arms inventory to match against it. A pause, long and merciless. You built a war to hide a theft, Pratt. You used my grief. My rage. You used my daughter's absence to keep me too occupied hunting ghosts to ever look at my own supply ledgers. This is absurd. Pratt's composure was cracking now, visibly, the hired guns beside him shifting uneasily, eyes flicking between their employer and 20 leveled army rifles. You cannot possibly believe the word of a savage and a wayward girl over a federal appointee. I believe, Colonel Hale said, the evidence in my hand. Which is considerably more than I can say I ever did for you. For one long, suspended moment, nobody in the clearing moved. Odessa's heart hammered, so hard she was certain Delshay must have been able to hear it beside her. One of Pratt's hired men shifted his hand toward his holster, slow, testing. Don't, Marsh said, quiet, absolute, his own rifle already raised and steady. There are 20 of us, and 5 of you, and every man here would very much enjoy an excuse. The hand fell away. Pratt's face went, through several expressions in quick succession, fury, calculation, and finally, as he understood, with total clarity, that the ground had simply vanished out, from under him, something close to despair. Colonel, he tried one final time, softer now, almost pleading. Everett. We've known each other 8 years. Surely there's an arrangement. There is, Colonel Hale said. You'll answer for every page in that ledger before a federal court in Santa Fe. And you will do it in restraints, Cyrus, starting this very hour. Pratt's eyes swept the clearing one final time, searching, Odessa realized, for some remaining crack in the wall closing around him. They landed on her. You, he said, and something in his voice curdled, the practiced smoothness finally giving way to something meaner underneath. None of this exists without you, does it? The colonel's own daughter. Playing detective in her father's desk drawers. Years of it, Odessa said. Her voice did not shake. She was almost surprised by that herself. I found the first page, when I was 18 years old, Mr. Pratt. I've had a great deal of time, since then to get very, very thorough. You understand what you've done. Pratt's jaw was tight now, something desperate creeping into the calculation behind his eyes. You understand what happens to a woman who humiliates men like your father in front of his own command. I understand, Odessa said, that a man who steals from starving people and then arranges wars to cover his theft doesn't get to lecture anyone about humiliation. Careful, girl. No. Delshay's voice, low and absolute, cutting across the clearing, before Odessa needed to say another word herself. He had not moved from her side, but something in his stillness now carried its own kind of threat, one that made even the hired guns beside Pratt go very quiet. You will not speak to her that way again. Pratt's mouth opened. Closed. He looked, for just a moment, like a man doing sums he did not like the answer to. 20 rifles, Marsh said quietly, into the silence that followed. 5 of you. I'd think carefully about which words you choose next, Mr. Pratt. It was over faster than Odessa had let herself imagine it could be. 2 of Pratt's hired men surrendered their weapons the instant the outcome became obvious, self-preservation winning easily, over loyalty that had only ever been rented, never earned. The other 2 tried to bolt for the tree lean, and were run down, within a quarter mile by soldiers who, whatever their private feelings about the morning's revelations, still remembered precisely how to do their jobs. Pratt himself did not resist. Simply sat very still on his horse, as 2 soldiers moved to flank him, his face gone slack, with the particular stillness of a man watching an entire life's careful architecture collapse in the space of 10 minutes. Odessa came out, from behind the garden wall, as the last of it settled, Delshay's hand finding hers, without either of them quite deciding to reach for the other, and together they crossed the clearing to where Raphael stood, with Wren, safe, wide-eyed, utterly unaware of how close the morning had come to ending very differently. Colonel Hale watched them cross the yard. And when Odessa reached him, her daughter now back in her arms, he did something she had not once, in her entire life, seen her father do in public. He reached out. Rested one hand, briefly, against the crown of Wren's head, the gesture of a man who has just understood, all at once, everything he very nearly lost the chance to be part of. I owe you both, he said, and his eyes moved, deliberately this time, to Delshay, an apology I do not know how to make large enough. Start, Delshay said, by telling the truth about my brother. In your reports. In the courtroom, when Pratt stands trial. Let his name be known for what he was. Not what Pratt needed him to be. You have my word, Colonel Hale said. And something in the way he said it, flat, unadorned, a soldier's promise rather than a politician's, told Odessa he meant to keep it. The column left 3 days later, Pratt and his surviving men in restraints at its center, Marsh riding beside the colonel, with the particular set to his shoulders of a man who understood his career had just changed shape permanently, and had decided, all things considered, that the shape it had changed into suited him better than the one he was leaving behind. Colonel Hale lingered at the tree lean a moment, before he rode out. Turned back once, looking at the small family standing together in the clearing, his daughter, an Apache man he had spent years believing was his enemy, and a granddaughter, who carried, unmistakably, both their bloodlines written plainly across her face. The ranch remains yours, he said to Odessa. I won't pretend to have ever understood your choices, but I understand now, that they were never mine to make for you. Thank you, father. He hesitated. Something working behind his weathered face, that looked, for the first time in Odessa's memory, almost uncertain. Might I, he said finally, when my duties allow, come back? To see her grow. Odessa felt something in her chest, that had been braced tight for years finally, quietly, let go. We would welcome that, she said. Truly. He nodded once. Turned his horse. And rode out of the valley, that had given him back a daughter he thought he'd lost, leaving behind him a silence, that felt, for the first time either of them could remember, entirely unburdened. That evening, as the sun went down gold, and slow behind the western ridge, Odessa and Delshay sat together on the porch of the lodge they had built, with nothing but patience, and stubborn love, ran asleep between them, one small hand curled loosely around the pale turquoise stone, that had, years ago, passed from a stranger's palm, into a frightened, fascinated girl's hand beside a waterfall neither of them had ever forgotten. Do you think he'll come back? Odessa asked quietly. Truly. I think, Delshay said, a river wears down even the hardest stone. Given enough seasons. He looked at her, and something in his dark eyes held all the years of waiting, all the blood, and fear and stubborn, unreasonable hope that had brought them to this exact porch, this exact evening. We have already proven the harder thing, Odessa Hale. That love can survive what tried to kill it. Everything after this, that is simply the easier proof. Above them, the first stars began to open across a sky, that had watched, over every version of this story, from the very beginning, the frightened girl by the waterfall, the grieving woman certain she'd lost everything, the mother holding her daughter up to a grandfather learning, at last, how to see clearly. The turquoise stone caught the last of the light at Wren's throat, small and steady, carrying forward a promise made long, before she was ever born, that some loves are worth every year it takes to prove them true, and that the truth, however long it is buried, has a way of finding the daylight in the end. Dear listener, if you have stayed, with this story, until its final quiet hour, perhaps you know something of what Odessa knew. That love rarely arrives on schedule. That the truth sometimes takes years to surface, and costs more than we expect to bring, into the light. And that it is never too late, not at 18, not at 23, not at any age this life hands you, to choose the harder, truer path over the safe and easy lie. Some promises take years to keep. Some take a lifetime. But the ones worth keeping, in the end, always find their way home. And if tonight you are carrying a promise of your own, one that feels too old, too heavy, too foolish to still believe in, perhaps this story found you for a reason. Because it is never too late to lay the truth out on the table, and let the people you love see it clearly. Never too late to choose the harder road, if the harder road is the honest one. Thank you for spending this evening, with Odessa, and Delshay, and the daughter, who carried both their worlds inside her, unafraid.